Hi, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to the Nuke. This is a video, yes, what am I saying? Yeah, let me just put this down here. Okay, cool. Yeah, happy June. Happy Pride Month. This video is kind of like my queer TBR. I haven't read the books on this list, but I wanted to share them just because I felt like, you know, it's the month to be proud. And also just because these are books that I thought were interesting in a way that I think a lot of people during Pride Month would recommend very similar books in terms of like queer representation and also feel good stories and all that, but you know, in brand with what I like to do on this channel. I always believe in, you know, challenging yourself intellectually in different ways, and to really question that also in a personal capacity. So some of the books I have here with me are a range of like fiction to academic non-fiction, but also anything in between. I don't have poetry, I think, unfortunately, in this list, but I do have some in my TBR. It's just not in this one. If not, the video is gonna go on forever, so that's that. Before I begin, I just wanted to share some things, like some pottery that I made. So in my birthday vlog, I actually made these things. Isn't it so cute? Like, this is a little plate, and then I have this little bowl. And when I was making this bowl, I just wanted it to be like just enough for like some fruits. So I was thinking like a couple of grapes and then maybe a few slices of apples or whatever. I mean, it's a perfect size. This is literally what I wanted. Okay, so I have a couple of books. I am gonna start with this book called Notes of a Crocodile by Miaojin, translated by Bonnie Huie, I think. So this book, I have heard of it before. It's a pretty well-known book, credited often as like one of the pioneering works queer authors in Taiwan. And I think a lot of subsequent authors and stories that have come out of Taiwan that deal with queer themes have kind of, you know, related themselves a lot to this book. I think I have sort of been in the periphery of this book, but I guess, you know, I am trying to bump it on my TBR nowadays. And let me just read to you the synopsis of the book. Notes of a Crocodile is a coming-of-age story of queer misfits discovering love, friendship, and artistic affinity while hardly studying at Taiwan's most prestigious university, told through the eyes of an anonymous lesbian narrator called La Zi. This cult classic is a postmodern pastiche of diaries, vignettes, mash notes, aphorism, exegesis, I don't know how to pronounce that, and satire by an incisive prose stylist and major countercultural figure. So I guess it's really about like a bunch of queer young people trying to find their way in society. And also there seems to be quite a lot of commentary on the state of affairs in Taiwan at the time, because this was set in late 1980s Taiwan, where there was still quite, you know, explicit, rampant discrimination against queer people, queer communities. And like reading a little bit further, it seems like this author was really kind of moved by those circumstances and wanted to respond and represent like her own experiences on, you know, through the format of a story and through the format of a book. So I'm pretty excited to read this one, and I do think it is quite a famous book in this whole literary history of queer fiction from East Asia. The second book I have on my TBR is called Happy Stories, mostly by Norman Erikson Pasaribu, and it's translated by Tiffany Tsao. So actually my friend introduced this translator, Tiffany Tsao, to me, and she has worked on several Indonesian works, translating them from Bahasa Indo to English. I'm pretty excited to read this, I think, because it's, I mean, I do have an interest in Indonesian literature. I just haven't really been able to find like good translated fiction. And I also don't think my Bahasa is at a level of fluency where I can really thoroughly enjoy a novel. but I do hope to get there one day soon, so I'm pretty excited to find this book actually. It's a collection of 12 stories that queer the norm. It draws on Batak and Christian cultural elements that put queer characters in situations and plots conventionally filled by hetero characters. So it is a blend of science fiction, absurdism, and alternative historical realism. So yeah, I guess it's a bunch of stories that wanna dissect, heteronormative worlds and stories, and takes on the question of what if queer characters occupy these spaces instead. So that's pretty cool. I love how it's like Batak and Christian cultural references, and it also shows the diversity of cultural and religious beliefs in Indonesia itself. So I think it's really cool as well. Pretty excited to read this, honestly. Yeah, and I'm actually quite interested in reading more translated fiction from Southeast Asia. I've said this so many times on my channel. I guess it's a matter of me researching where I can get these books as well. So if you know any good Southeast Asian translators doing good work in translating Southeast Asian works, do let me know. Unfortunately, I am still mostly able to read only in English, but I should work on that, honestly. Yeah. Okay, the next book I have on my TBR is Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson. Again, I think this is another cult favorite. It is a book, sort of like part memoir of this protagonist who has grown up against a backdrop of very fervent religiousness, a very conservative religion background, and it's a coming of age tale that talks about this protagonist who falls in love with another girl, and there's a huge kind of deep dive into her psyche, how there's a whole mix of emotions. I do think there's a lot of this reckoning with one's religious background as well, and seeing how one can reconcile their growing feelings for someone that they're not supposed to be interested in, I think. And I guess it seems like there is also a lot of integration of fairy tales, so there is a mix of fairy tales and real life, and I've seen some of the reviews saying that it's a hit or miss for some people. Some people felt that it was a bit too self-absorbed. When you're trying to portray the everyday realities of what it feels like to be queer, and to be queer against all circumstances, I do think some element of exaggeration is needed, because it is not so simple as a simple conflict. I mean, it does feel more dramatic than it looks like. I think that's kind of the queer experience, where you have to live your everyday, but there's this huge drama that's playing out in your head. That's literally the only 3 fiction books I have on my list. Further on, moving on, the books I have are pretty much nonfiction in different ways. The first book I have here is Strange Natures, Futurity, Empathy, and the Queer Ecological Imagination by Nicole Seymour. So apparently this author has written about environmentalism in other ways, I think she had one book on being a bad environmentalist. I do think that it's a book that merges queer theory and ecological imagination, which is something I've mentioned several times on my channel before. How do we kind of think about ecology in many different ways, in much more radical and imaginative ways. And I do think queer theory is something that I personally resonate a lot with, in terms of how it articulates life experiences. I just think that there's so many systems in today's world, systems of power, that are so narrowly defined, and we really do need much more imagination. We also do need all of us to come forth with the different ways that we've been living our lives, to really show that no one really passes, no one really fits this perfect heteronormative perfect role in terms of identity, But anyway, this book, let me just read the synopsis again. It investigates the way in which contemporary queer fictions offer insight on environmental issues through the performance of specifically queer understanding of nature, non-human, and environmental degradation. It seems more like taking queer theory and seeing how that can be applied to environmentalism. So I do think that's kind of the process, rather than deep dives into environmentalism, but rather thinking about the ways that queer fiction in particular can offer new perspectives on environmentalism. So I think that's what I hope this book will do. And the next book I have is called Queer Ancient Ways, a Decolonial Exploration by Zairong, Xiang, Zairong? I don't know. So it talks about mythological figures across different regions and contexts. I really thought that this was so interesting, so cool, because it deals with like historical mythologies, and you know, you can have a queer reading of a lot of things in today's world, but to really unearth like a decolonial queer reading of history, I thought that was just so intriguing. Just the title alone was just so like captivating. You know, when we think about like modern categories and like modern themes and thoughts and all that, it's very easy to feel as though all these things are like so rigid. But the more you study history and the more you think about the way the world has been organized time and time again, you notice that human categories are just so fluid. And I think also if you read more about science and you read about the world, there's this article by SG Climate Rally that I recently read, which I'll link down below, that talked about queer ecology, and it talks about how like even the study of science and nature can be queer in itself. Like there's so many things, there's so many ways of understanding the world that just don't fit heteronormative standards, and that in itself, I mean, I do think queer as a category is so much bigger than like whatever is seen as heteronormative, which is so funny because queer it connotes a deviance from the norm, right? I mean, that's what queer means. It means like strange, it means weird, it means like non-standard. But you know, as I read more, I realize this category of non-standard is so much bigger, and so many things fall under this like deviance, you know, and like I think it's just so interesting to think that even though there's so many things that fall out of standard, like it's not standard, yet we really live our lives and we really see all these systems of power according to such like standard ways of living, like normative ways of living, which is actually not the actual reality of what a lot of people are going through, which I just thought like logically just doesn't make sense. But yeah, I mean, I'm just really excited to read this book. The next book I have here is Unthinking Mastery, Dehumanism and Decolonial Entanglements by Julietta Singh. Now you might notice that I keep harping on decolonial theory. This has been something that I've always been conscious about, like in my own reading and in my own life as well. Like, how do we integrate decolonial thought into our lives? And I do think there's a strong connection between decolonial ways of thinking and queer ways of living, because again, like a lot of what we see as like heteronormativity has been enforced by colonialism. It has been enforced by very specific strands of thought that has been, you know, spread and emphasized and institutionalized by various colonialist endeavors. So I do think there's a lot of connection there that, you know, I myself am starting to really understand, not just in my own personal life, but also like towards the environment, you know, towards human society, towards like non-human beings. I think these are all related. So I was really excited when I found this book by Julietta Singh. It talks about unthinking mastery, which means like how do we not form structures around like a master? Like, what does it mean to really let go of this idea of power and control, and rather than like swapping power positions, it's more of like really letting go of the idea of control altogether. Julietta Singh draws on post-colonial theory, queer theory, new materialism, and animal studies to trace how pervasive the concept of mastery has been to modern politics and anti-colonial movements, so such as the colonial domination of bodies, intellectual and linguistic mastery, etc. Julietta Singh suggests that only by moving beyond compulsive desires to be masterful human subjects can we really disentangle ourselves from the legacies of violence and fantasies of invulnerability that lead us to hurt other humans, animals, and the environment. Which I think is a great statement to make. And I just want to say this, like, even though nowadays we might see Pride as a very like joyous occasion, we might see like, you know, Pride Month as something that's so positive and uplifting. The fact is that like every day queer people, like people from queer communities, like, or you know, they may not even have a community where they can express their queerness like safely and in a way that's embraced. I mean, I feel like there's just still so many queer people, like LGBTQ people, communities, and all that, like, that still have to live in such difficult circumstances every day. And of course this differs according to like where you're based, like what circumstances you're in, what kind of class, like social economic class you're in, and all that. There's so many different factors that really affect the way that you can, you know, really even begin to think about, not even just like express, but to even think about your own queer identity. And I do acknowledge it is a very privileged thing for me to be able to like think about queer theory, and for me to theorize about all these things, and to read all these things, and to really like regard queerness in such an intellectual manner, where I know, like, you know, of course living it out every day is so different. And I just want to say that, like, even though we can celebrate it this month, there's just so much that we need to do. There's still so much left. There's still so much we have to untangle in our everyday lives. There's still so much disempowerment that's happening. There's still so much discrimination that's happening. And I think we still have a long way to go when it comes to like LGBTQ plus rights and all that. So just to put it out there, even though I do talk about queer theory in a very like theoretical way, and I guess in a very like distant intellectual way, I just want to say that all these things are real life things. I don't think it's any worth just me theorizing alone here. I do hope that whatever books I read and whatever things I do and whatever ideas I share can find like meaning in people's everyday lives, at least, or at least in my life, to enact them in actual ways. So I just want to put that out there, because I know it's very easy for books to just think about queer theory and queer representation in a very like dislocated way. Okay, next book I have here is No Modernism Without Lesbians by Diana Souhami. This is set in Paris, and it talks about 4 women who have been identified to different extents as like being lesbians, or at least sapphic, like, you know, being in romantic relationships with other women, and talking about their role in the cultural revolution of modernism in Paris. So I guess it's a bit more of like autobiographical, talking about these 4 women, their lives, like the people that they interacted with and the things that they've done. So for example, I think one of them was a philanthropist, another person was a bit more like politically involved. I wasn't super keen because this is based in Paris. It's not something that I am totally interested in, but I do want to give it a try at least. But queer history is something that I've always been interested in. Ideally Southeast Asian queer history, but I think a lot of the books in that area are like very academic books. So when I saw this book, I was like, okay, at least it's somewhat biographical. It might be a bit more interesting to read. But I do hope to find similar titles based in Asia and Southeast Asia specifically. So if you know any, do let me know. But I thought it was pretty interesting that that the author puts forth the argument that modernism, you know, like these 4 lesbians were really central to the whole modernist revolution. And I like that premise, you know. Okay, the next book I have here is a book that I did talk about on my channel before. I think my video on mental health books. And I just wanted to highlight it again because I haven't had the chance to really finish the book. It's a collection of personal reflections and artistic representations talking about the intersection of mental illness, and LGBTQ plus identity, as well as the historical views towards queer and trans identity and their equation to mental illness. So I do think that's a major thing to consider as well, that only up to recently being trans and being homosexual is seen as a sign of mental affliction, like mental illness. And also talks about like accessibility of mental health care, and also the need for affirmative, effective services. So I do think it's a very inclusive collection of stories. Again, I think it's mostly based in the US, but you know, given that the topic is still very niche and very new, I'm pretty willing to just like you read it as a book on its own. In Singapore, there is a book called Huie, and I'll link it down below as well. This book isn't just about like, I mean, it is about mental health issues in general. In Singapore, there are several chapters that do talk about like LGBTQ plus communities and mental health services and issues relevant in Singapore. So if you're in Singapore, you can check that book out. But if not, this is probably the closest I can get to a more like inclusive intersection of LGBTQ plus communities and mental health. If you know any other collections or any other books to talk about this, do let me know. I think it's always very useful to have a collection of stories and anecdotes, especially like anthologies are just so helpful in representation. Okay, the last book I have is a pretty popular book. I think at one point I saw it everywhere on Bookstagram. It's called Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. This exceedingly accessible guide to asexuality shows that the issues that aces face, confusion around sexual activity, the intersection of sexuality and identity, navigating different needs in relationships, are conflicts that all of us need to address as we move through the world. To me, I've never really read about asexuality before, which is why I included this in my TBR. I myself have had like personal experiences with thinking about asexuality. It is really important for people who have never really thought about asexuality to really think about what it might signify to them, because in my own experience, like asexuality isn't just about like the identity itself, but rather what really is a relationship. What do you really need in a relationship? I think a lot of asexuals have a lot of assumptions that they have to fend off all the time from other people, which I honestly think is unfair, because like it really just shows how sexualized certain conceptions of love and relationships are when you think about it. Yeah, so I'm pretty glad to have this on my TBR, and I do think it's a bit more accessible and general than some of the earlier academic books that I have. I hope that it would be a useful book for a lot of you as well. That is my Pride recommendations for the month. I hope you enjoy the list. If you have read any of the books that I mentioned, do let me know what you think about them. Honestly, I am totally intrigued by all of them. Not all of them have great reviews. I think some of them are so obscure that no one has read them before. I will link, I guess, like other books down below, and if you have some of your own that you want to share, go ahead and share them, because it's the month of love. It's the month of like celebrating love. So I am quite happy to be sharing all these books with you. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that wherever you are, like even if you can't celebrate Pride Month, or even in your own context, it isn't something that you can be so open about. I do want to affirm that your experiences and your identity is valid, and that you can take your time to live your life on your own means. You don't have to be specifically like queer in a certain way, or like gay in a certain way. It really depends on your own life and your own experiences, and we all come from such different historical and cultural backgrounds that it doesn't make sense to have just one universal understanding of what queerness is. And I hope like that's at least the thing that you get away from all these books that I have in my list. It really isn't about like specific types of lifestyles, but rather like really understanding the range and the fluidity of human experiences that we should all honor and celebrate. Yeah, so that's that, and thank you once again for watching my videos and for being here. Yeah, thank you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Ooh.